Hi, everyone. Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, and welcome to this very first episode of Countdown to the Cup, where we are counting down the days until the Breeders' Cup taking place at Del Mar that first weekend in November. Unbelievable that we have about a month until those huge races, the best horses from across the world competing against each other out where the turf meets the surf in Del Mar. Now, listen, if this is your first time watching a NYRA Bets video, make sure to press that like button on this video and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel. Subscription is completely free, and all it does is it notifies you every time we have a new video. And we have a lot of great race previews, full card analyses, and so much more. And we really do cover races from coast to coast across the country. Just this week, we're going to be looking at Belmont at the Big A, Keeneland, as well as the races taking place in France and Longchamp with the Arc. So a lot of great races, a lot of great content here on NYRA Bets. Now, countdown to the Cup, what are we going to be doing each week? Well, each week we're going to be kind of highlighting a little bit of a different division. Sometimes we're going to be highlighting different trainers. And sometimes as we get closer to the Breeders' Cup, we're going to have a couple of episodes each week. We're going to do some in-depth barn tours of some of the major trainers and looking at who they have coming into the Breeders' Cup and what are some historical trends we can learn from that. So there's going to be a ton of different content focused on the Breeders' Cup. So if you are a Breeders' Cup fan or you need to catch up a little bit because you've not been paying attention to some of these Challenge Series races, this is a great resource for you to check out. So listen, let's start by just talking about the headlining race, which is the Breeders' Cup Classic, and talking about some of the top contenders that we see this year. And I have this listed more in alphabetical order, not trying to make any sort of statements right now. I know people like posting their top 10 lists and top 5 lists, and I get it. We're going to have our top 5s and top 10s throughout the next month leading up to the Breeders' Cup here on NYRA Bets as well. But at this point, just taking stock of who are the major players in this race. And you see Arthur's Ride, Fierceness, Highland Falls, Sierra Leone, Subsanador, Tapit Trice. Those are your major American players. And they're coming in various form. Arthur's Ride, very impressive in the Whitney, but got pressured in that Jockey Club Gold Cup up at Saratoga by Highland Falls and faded quite a bit that day. Highland Falls is a horse I've been high on for a long time. This is just a late developing horse that I feel like is getting better and better and better for Brad Cox, coming off that very impressive win in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. I thought a brilliant ride by jockey Flavian Pratt, who is going to have some decisions to make because Sierra Leone is a horse that he rides all the time, and that's a horse that came in third in the Travers, is an incredibly consistent horse, has yet to miss the board in his career, but is obviously going to be facing older company and has that deep closing running style that does not necessarily set up very well for Del Mar and really West Coast racing in general. So it is going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Fierceness, of course, coming off that incredible win in the Travers over Torpedo Anna, and a horse that I think a lot of us sold short. And I was one of the doubters. I had him. Listen, I picked him in the Jim Dandy. I liked him that day. I did not like him in the Travers at all. I thought the 1.25 miles was going to be too long. I thought the pace might be a little bit of an issue. And what jockey John Velasquez did was basically say, listen, I'm just not going to get in his way. I'm going to let him run his race, and that's going to be the winning ticket. Because whenever I let him run his race, he wins. And whenever I try to get him to do something he doesn't want to do, that's when something bad happens. So maybe they figured it out with Fierceness, who did deliver consecutive good performances for the first time in his career, winning the Dandy and the Travers back-to-back. But certainly another major pace presence up on the front end. And then you have Subsanador, who just ran a huge race, beating National Treasure in that California Crown for Richard Mandela. And this one has always been a horse that showed a ton of talent, and I feel like it's finally putting it all together. Has a nice, very effective tracking running style. Like I said, looked so good that day. Another horse that looked really, really good in the Woodward was Tapit Trice. Listen, he doesn't make it easy for himself. He breaks dead last. I joked on X that he looks like me getting out of the starting blocks in the 100-meter dash. It's not what you want to see, folks. I don't have a quick turn of foot coming out of the blocks, and nor does Tapit Trice. And yet he kind of finds a way to win. And once he gets that huge stride of his going, he's going to love the 1.25 miles. There's no doubt about that. It's just kind of the same issue that you have with Sierra Leone in terms of, does he give himself too much to do coming for home? But he's looked really, really good coming out of that last win in the Woodward over this past weekend. Now, there are a couple of horses that I didn't mention initially, and that's because they're international horses. City of Troy, going to be trying dirt for the first time, potentially, right? He's probably going to be cross-entered in the turf as well. Aidan O'Brien could certainly send him there. However, all indications are he's going to take a shot at the dirt, and he's going to take a shot in the Breeders' Cup Classic, which I think is fantastic. He's the son of Justify. He had a very highly publicized workout over synthetic, where he just kind of, absolutely demolished the competition he was running up against that day and the workout partners. And so he's certainly pointed towards running in the Classic, which, like I said, I think is fantastic to see these horses trying different surfaces and coming over and challenging the best dirt horses in the country and in the world, because City of Troy is certainly the best 3-year-old turf horse in the world. And going to be interesting to see him take on a challenge here. But he's a horse that likes to be pretty forwardly placed. If you watched that Juddmonte International last time out, you saw that in that particular race. Now, then you have the 3 Japanese horses, Derma Sotogake, Ushba Tesoro, and Forever Young. Derma and Ushba both ran in the same race last week, the Nippon TV High. And, Ushba I thought looked really good. Ushba he's a deep closer, but he made his big run, didn't quite get there at the end, wasn't probably fully cranked up. I was maybe a little disappointed with Derma Sotogake, a horse that I always like, that teases a lot of talent at times, but has not won a race since that UAE Derby 2 years ago where he was so impressive. Now, he ran at Santa Anita last year and ran second in the Breeders' Cup Classic. So, he can do the distance. He can. That's not the issue. He's just a quirky horse. Maybe he just needed a race under his belt. He faded a little bit late in that last race after really sitting right on the pace. So maybe it was just a matter of needs a little bit more conditioning, and now he'll be ready and more fit for the Breeders' Cup Classic. But the horse that is so impressive is Yoshida Yahagi's Forever Young, and he just ran his prep race today. Now, this is a horse that finished third by about that much, by about a nose in the Kentucky Derby, and has not run since then. Ran in the Japan Dirt Classic today, faced a couple of nice horses, one in particular, Ramjet, who, if you follow Japanese racing, that horse has been racking up some wins and has been active, whereas Forever Young has not raced since May. So this is the first race back from a significant layoff. And I want to show you the start and the finish of this race because I think it's important. So in the start of the race, he's the number 1 post, and you see right there, he just stumbles at the start. That has been an issue for Forever Young in several of his races. He did not break particularly well in the Kentucky Derby. If you remember going back to the Saudi Derby, he also did not break particularly well that day. So the fact that he had that stumble, and I'm going to put it up again on the screen so you can see it. Again, he's in the number 1 post. And so if you look at that number 1 post, stumbles, falls out of the gate. Listen, he was on the rail. He got a ground-saving trip. He still did have to contend with some other horses around him throughout the race. So that was, I think, a positive thing to see him deal with. I don't want to say adversity, but certainly had to deal with some things. But that said, he is incredibly talented. His only loss is that 3rd place in the Kentucky Derby. And turning for home today, he put everybody away. You see the white cap, the red, maroon, and white silks. And the jockey just kind of shakes the reins, goes to the crop to give him some encouragement here, and he just kind of takes off at this point. You do have a horse, number 13, kind of coming up a little bit, or the 10, I should say, coming up a little bit here on him. But really, the result was never in doubt, and he ends up easily winning the Japan Dirt Classic, going 2,000 meters in a final time of 2:04.1. For those interested in Japanese racing, maybe not know much about it, they do run over a slightly different surface over there. It's actually imported Australian sand and like a sand-based mixture. And so it is a little bit of a different surface. But obviously, we saw he can handle the dirt at Churchill Downs. He handled the dirt over in Saudi and Dubai. So that's not an issue. He's a really impressive horse, and certainly maybe the best 3-year-old we have in the world right now. We'll have to see, because that's the exciting part is City of Troy is the best 3-year-old in the turf. And then you have horses like Fierceness and Sierra Leone and Forever Young, who are all contending for that top 3-year-old title as well. And then you have some great older horses, like I said, Arthur's Ride, Highland Falls, Subsanador, Tapatrice, all really intriguing horses. And this is setting up to be a fascinating race. It's going to be interesting, the pace scenario. You know Arthur's Ride is going to go out there on the front end. You know Fierceness is going to go out there on the front end. I'd imagine a horse like Derma wants to be pretty close. Forever Young can stalk and kind of sit in more of a tracking trip, but it will be interesting to see once they draw this field officially how it ends up playing out. Well, I brought up the Japanese runners in the Classic, and we've been talking a lot about Japan over the last few years in international racing. And one of the things that, if you're going to be handicapping the Breeders' Cup this year, you have to know about the Japanese horses because they're bringing over a lot. Now, this is not the finalized list necessarily. Obviously, horses still have to end up drawing into the various races. But as of right now, they're looking at bringing as many as 19 horses over to the Breeders' Cup. And this is a significant group. And one of the benefits of having the Breeders' Cup, I think, on the West Coast these last couple of years is you get more and more Japanese horses willing to come over. The flight and the trip and the travel is not as taxing on the horses as opposed to going to Kentucky or coming to the East Coast. So, like I said, interesting to see that they're bringing this many over. Now, we've been focused on Ushba Tesoro and Derma Sotogake and Forever Young, but they have a lot of really nice horses. Shahryar is an outstanding turf horse. Right? I think a lot of people thought if maybe he had gotten a better trip last year, might have actually won that turf race in the Breeders' Cup. So very talented horse. But there's a couple of others that I want to mention. Awesome Result, running in the distaff, undefeated. This is, some might say, the biggest threat to Torpedo Anna and Idiomatic. It's going to be interesting to see because I think Torpedo Anna and Idiomatic are probably going to be your top two choices. But Awesome Result is a very serious filly. And she has been dominant over in Japan. So that's one to certainly keep in mind. Another one I want to highlight, American Bikini, running in the juvenile fillies. She just absolutely demolished the male 2-year-old competition in her last race in Japan. She is a serious runner as well. That is one to absolutely take seriously in this spot. The other horse that I'll mention on this list, Tio St. Denis. This is a horse that came over, if you remember, ran on the undercard of the Kentucky Derby and ran like a bullet that day and opened up huge amount of lengths, ended up holding on for third in one of the undercard stakes races. But the thing about Tio St. Denis is now that horse is cutting back and is going to be going to the dirt mile. And I think absolutely fits the description there. That dirt mile is shaping up to be a really interesting race. I have a feeling, and I don't know this, and it's not been confirmed yet. One of the reasons I didn't have National Treasure on that previous graphic is I feel like National Treasure is going to the dirt mile. I feel like Seize the Gray is probably going to go to the dirt mile. Dwayne Lucas alluded to that a little bit in the post-race interview after that horse won the Pennsylvania Derby. And the other horse that I didn't mention up there was Next, who is, I think, in between deciding whether or not to go to the Breeders' Cup Classic or the turf. By all indications, they are leaning a little bit towards the turf because they think the 1.5 miles is more important than the surface. Interesting discussion there. But getting back to the Japanese, it's not just those 3 horses in the Classic. You have a lot of really nice horses. I even like a horse like Geoglyph quite a bit. I liked that horse for a while, actually. I remember that horse was a really good 2-year-old, actually. And so that's one that I've always been interested in. Got a couple of nice sprinters coming over. The juveniles, I think you have to take seriously. But it's going to be a really exciting contingent to watch these Japanese horses. And we're going to have a deeper dive on this Japanese contingent as we get closer to the day of the Breeders' Cup and show you some different footage and analysis of those races. Now, we got a huge weekend ahead of us. So if you haven't been following the Breeders' Cup Challenge Series, you're kind of in luck because this weekend there are 20. That's right, 20 Breeders' Cup Challenge races. It's amazing to see all of these races. Now, the reason for this, you'll see a lot of them are juvenile races. So those juvenile Challenge Series races, they don't start until much later in the year when the horses really start stretching out to 1 mile and longer. And so you start to see a lot of those pop up. But up here in New York, obviously, we have the Futurity, we got the Champagne, we got the Frisette. They got a bunch down in Keeneland, obviously with the Ogden Phoenix and the Jessamine and the Alcibiades, the Breeders' Futurity. Got a couple out west with the Oakleaf and the Rodeo Drive and the American Pharaoh. And then we got a bunch over in Europe as well. with the Arc, and we got the Arc de Triomphe, and we got the Marcel Boussac, and we got the Lagardère, and so Le Opera. We got a lot of great races, and then we still have some more on Sunday as well. We got the Miss Grillo, which we're making up from last week when we had to take it off the turf. The good news is weather looks fantastic for Sunday up here in New York, so that's good to see. I got the Spinster and the Castle and Key Bourbon down in Keeneland. So it's a huge weekend of racing. You see all the divisions that these races are connected to. And next week, we'll go through and talk a little bit more about who is in and who is out from these different divisions. Because really, until this weekend, this is the final big weekend of Breeders' Cup Challenge Series races. And next week, I think we'll have a much better sense of not only the hierarchy of these different divisions, but simply who is going to really be a serious player. And we'll get a sense of who's actually qualified for some of these races, which I think is particularly important in the juvenile. A lot of these other races, particularly here in the United States, the Coolmore Turf Mile, an amazing race, but some of these older races, Filly and Mare Sprint with the Thoroughbred Club of America, those we kind of already know who's in that division. We kind of know who's probably going to be in that Breeders' Cup. And yes, another horse could absolutely qualify. You could have a long shot that makes it, and that would be always a lot of fun. But it's really the juvenile races where you go, we got to see who fires, because up here in New York, the horses are stretching out to a mile. Down in Keeneland, they're stretching out. They're going 2 turns for the first time in their careers on the dirt. So that's another dynamic. So you don't know who's going to necessarily show up and who's not. And that could have a huge impact on who ends up actually making it to Del Mar for that Breeders' Cup. So huge weekend, though. We got a lot of coverage for you. Like I said, Capping the Card is going to cover the entire Saturday Keeneland card, which features several of these When You're In races. I have an early preview with Kaylee Shapiro up on the Alcibiades and the Breeders' Futurity. I have an early preview of Champagne that's up, and then I'm going to be joined by Acacia Clement to talk about the Frisette and the Champagne. And then, like I said, I got Matt Chapman coming over from At the Races. Great UK analyst has agreed to join me. We're going to be talking about the Arc de Triomphe and some of those undercard races that are also When You're In. So always a lot of fun to see which horses qualify for the Breeders' Cup with this big final weekend. All right. Well, listen, everyone, thanks so much for tuning into this first episode of Countdown to the Cup. We're going to have a lot more for you coming up in the subsequent weeks. Like I said, we got barn tours set up. We're going to start doing maybe some live streams, subscriber-only live streams, which is why you should be subscribing to NYRA Bets YouTube so you don't get shut out from attending any of those. And like I said, subscribing is completely free of cost, just allows you to some of the perks of being a subscriber and lets you know when the new videos drop. All right, friends, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.